our boys are really perceptive. They're watching and they're seeing that, oh, girls don't get in trouble for things that I do. Mm-hmm. Girls can be talking, but I get in trouble for it. The girls are chosen for the star students and boys aren't. And that they're being subtly given this message from an early age that you're too much, you're too noisy, you're too active, just sit still, listen, and learn.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. This week, I'm talking with speaker, author, educator, and family coach Janet Allison about the emotional lives of boys. Janet is the founder of Boys Alive and the co-host of the podcast On Boys, and for more than 20 years has been on a mission to empower parents and teachers to raise boys to be more confident, caring, and capable men. In our conversation, we talk about the ways that learning, communication, and emotional expression might be different for boys, why schools are failing boys, and what you can do to meet your boy's deeply human need for connection. And just a note, while our discussion largely centers around and relies on binary gender norms, we also discuss how our expanding understanding of gender identity is showing up in her work. Thank you so much. And now, here is my conversation with Janet Allison. Hey, Janet, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Debbie. So good to be here.
It's fun to have you on my show. I've been on your show. Maybe take a few minutes and tell us about your work in the world and your podcast.
Absolutely. Well, our show is On Boys, and I co-host that with Jennifer Fink of Building Boys. And I am Boys Alive, have been for about 20 years. Started with, I was a teacher and I had 10 boys and 2 girls in my first grade and did not have a clue, because I raised daughters. And so here were all these boys that were very active, very creative. I put that in air quotes, very busy. And I was scrambling to understand what they needed, because nowhere in my training, in my university degree, nobody talked about how different boys would be in the classroom than girls. This was the mid-90s, and all the focus at that time was on girls. Mm-hmm. And equity in sports and all of those things. And our boys were getting lost and left behind. And so I got really curious and did a lot of looking into who was talking about boys at that time. There were not very many people talking about boys. Curious about brain differences, curious about communication styles, learning styles, and all of that kind of just funneled me into Boys Alive. And I'm a family coach and an author and a podcaster like you. And, it's interesting how the events in our lives push us in certain directions. We've had the conversation about Asher and you taking up this work. And I have just been thrilled, especially with the podcast, to be able to interview experts and authors and thought leaders and bring the awareness that our boys are different in the way. So often, many of my family coaching clients are moms who were raised with sisters, who were raised with a single mom. And now all of a sudden, here are these boys that are presenting them with lots of puzzles to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. It brought up so many things for me. First of all, you may know this, but I used to be a teen girl expert. So before I had a child, I spent 15 years writing nonfiction, self-confidence, self-esteem books for teen girls. I volunteered with teen girls like that. I spoke at girls' conferences. I was all about girl empowerment. And when I discovered I was having a son, I remember being, first of all, shocked. It's like, can you check that again? And one of the first things I said to my husband was, I'm going to have to do a lot of work around my own baggage surrounding boys and what I know about boys, because being so pro girl and in that space, I was like, I got some work to do. And then I also kind of got excited about, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to really lean into raising a respectful man. And we need men who grow up as feminists and, and who live fully, emotional lives. And so I love the work that you're doing. And I love how you came to it. It's fascinating.
Well, and I was thinking about the work you're doing and differently wired. And I think, when we can back up from that, and I feel like this understanding is bedrock. And when we understand, of course, we look at the world through a female lens as moms, as women. When we can recognize that we do that and step away from the expectation that our boys are going to want to talk to us like our girls do, and they're going to want to have those deep, meaningful conversations. And when we recognize, they're just as sensitive, they're just as desirous of connection, but it comes in a little different package. And when we can understand what that package is, which is very active, which is, I don't want to sit and look you in the eye and have a long, deep, meaningful conversation with you. But if we're out tossing a ball or we're on a walk, I am going to communicate with you. But if we can step away from that our female perception, and I know you've got dads listening too. So part of this too is understanding how you relate to the men in your life, because it's all the same. And is it every boy? Is it every man? No, absolutely not. It's tendencies. And so it just adds to our repertoire of being able to connect with another human being.
So I have just this focus group sample of one in my home. I've got a teenage son. So I would love to hear from you. What is really going on with the emotional lives of boys? Because in my world, the boys that I know or that are friends with my son are super in touch with, they have really high emotional IQ. And I also know that their parents are working really hard to support that. But if we zoom out and look generally, what is going on with the emotional lives of boys right now?
Yeah, I think it is changing a cultural perception that because boys don't talk, they don't feel. And they do. And they do. And they may just not be able to express it in the way that we would, again, as females, imagine they express it. So we have to be super, get our radar, our antenna up and be really aware. And for boys, there's a lot around shame and embarrassment and putting boys on the spot. There's a lot around, I just always go back to this mom who told me that her first grader, her 7-year-old boy, came home from school one day and said, "Mom, all the girls are perfect and I'm the bad one." And so here's a little boy that from probably preschool, kindergarten, first grade for sure, has had female teachers. And, our boys are really perceptive. They're watching and they're seeing that, girls don't get in trouble for things that I do. Girls can be talking, but I get in trouble for it. The girls are chosen for the star students and boys aren't. And that they're being subtly given this message from an early age that you're too much, you're too noisy, you're too active, just sit still, listen and learn is what we often wish for. And hey, I was there as a teacher, like, I've got this brilliant lesson, just sit still, just listen. And that is not how boys typically operate in the world. And so it's a willingness to observe and to listen. And part of it is, are you ready to listen when they're ready to talk? And especially with teens, their biological clock is shifting. They're up later at night and way more active. I was working with a family recently who, the 14-year-old boy, and the dad wanted him to converse and do it in the morning because that's when the dad was ready to talk. And then the mom was there going, yeah, but he really lights up at around 9 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when he opens up. That's when he's ready to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not on our time frame as parents. We have to be aware of, oh, this is okay. You're going to have to stay up a little later, mom and dad, so you can access that time when your boy is ready to open up, is ready to share.
Yeah, that happens at about 1:45 in my house.
Yeah.
And most times I'm okay with that. And other times I'm just like, we're going to have to put a pin in this for now because I'm going to bed. But yes. So I have all these questions, and I don't want to go off in a whole other direction, but also I find it so interesting that, you're describing classrooms and a culture around our kids in school that really isn't designed to embrace perhaps what is a more natural way of being for boys than girls. And just as a caveat, we are talking about gender identity, which is also, there's a lot of fluidity there. So I just want to say that for listeners who are like, my child doesn't fit in either bucket. And I do want to touch upon that as well. But so we've got these kids growing up, these boys who are their needs are not being met necessarily in schools. They get in trouble more. They're perceived as being more disruptive. And yet, culturally, they, especially as a white man, but men have a lot more doors open to them, at least historically.
They do, and it's the doors that are the outward doors, and so they're the achievers. And boys will typically overestimate their ability to achieve. They'll overestimate what grade they're going to get on a test. Why? I don't have an answer for that, but they do. And I think historically, it's been the role of women and the role of men. And so there's that piece. But I look at the men and especially, the Me Too movement, and we have a lot of angry adult men. Mm-hmm. And I trace it back to this place where their full selves are not being met. They're being prodded and directed to go, to achieve, go to law school, do the thing. And then we have angry men who, because their sensitive side, their emotional side hasn't been nurtured, hasn't been grown. We have this imbalance as adults, and that doesn't go well for anyone. And often it's the men who are achieving outwardly that are suffering inwardly, or their families are suffering. Their spouse is suffering because, he won't talk to me. We are not connected. We're going through the motions. And so it's a big question without easy answers.
It also underscores the importance of doing this work. And I know that you are considered a boys and anger expert. That is a real focus of your work. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Why anger seems to be the go-to emotion for boys? Again, not all boys. I don't
exactly always, not all
for many boys,
for many. And we'll say anger and big emotions. There might be the attitude of a 14-year-old, the slamming doors, the withdrawal, silent treatment, all of that. So it's not just anger, rage, although it is that too, but it's tantrums. And part of it is, again, this cultural message of boys don't cry, boys don't feel. And then you overlay that with just simply understanding a boy's nature, which is to be physical first. What do we do as parents? Use your words, use your words. Well, he can't get to his words until he's moved his body. So a boy's brain is in motion when his body is in motion. Those are together. And if his body isn't moving, his brain cannot move. His brain cannot find the words that you're standing over him telling him to find. And so getting comfortable with large expressions of anger, of emotion, flat out pounding fists on the floor, fists through the wall. Not that we're encouraging that, but we need to recognize that our boys, especially because they are so physical, need an outlet. They need to be able to, punch a punching bag, to pound that pillow, to run around the block and get that out of their bodies before we try to sit down and have the conversation about, well, why did you hit your brother? And it's not okay. We have to let them get those feelings out of their bodies first, and then address the emotional piece, the feelings, and the how to do it differently the next time. But until we can be comfortable as parents, because it's not comfortable, it's scary, especially when your boy gets bigger than you. It's really scary. So getting comfortable with that, sitting with them in their anger is an important first step that we often try to stop it, make it stop, which just, as we know, just pushes it down further, not healthy.
Right. Yeah. And, I've said this in other conversations on the show, but for me personally, I grew up in a family culture where anger was not an okay emotion to feel. And so that is work I have had to do internally is learn, as you said, sitting in that anger, getting comfortable with it, because my, kind of knee-jerk reaction to anger has always been to immediately just want to shut it down because it feels out of control. It makes me feel threatened. It just kind of triggers me in so many ways. And so I'm
a bad parent. Yeah. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my kid? All of those things come up with anger. And yet, if you can level it with all the other emotions, because it's just more energy, just happens to be loaded with, as you said, how is anger handled in your family? My family, we did not have anger. You do not, total silence.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls, and with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free. There are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. So what about differently wired boys specifically? So, the way you're describing the fact that boys generally need to move their bodies first, that physical expression, that makes me think of, kids who have ADHD and who are more physical and movement is part of how they regulate or kind of process. But what have you seen in your work in terms of maybe just broadly the emotional lives, inner lives of boys? And are there more challenges for differently wired boys, or are there some things that are actually more accessible because a boy is differently wired?
Well, I think this is where you and I put our brains together and our expertise together, because I feel like, my area of knowledge is boys in general, male tendencies. And again, not everybody. And when we understand boys at a fundamental level of, they need to move their bodies, when we have realistic expectations for our boys. I mean, science tells us they don't typically have as many words as early as girls. If we know how to connect with them in a boy-friendly way, which is not expecting as much eye contact, using fewer words because our words overwhelm them and their brains shut down, or they get squirrely and, this is too much. When we understand these fundamental concepts about how to relate to boys, then we get to add, it's like we've got bedrock, we've got that bottom layer of the cake now, and now we can put on the flavor in the middle, which is the differently wired. And, okay, my boy has this, or my boy has that. And how does that also relate to how he experiences the world and connects with the world? And that's the beauty of the work that you do, of bringing in that informational piece as well. But fundamentally, he has tendencies that are typical boy tendencies. So starting there and understanding, and the other piece too, and I'm sure you talk about this, is as moms, as parents, is not taking things personally. And it can be so easy to go there. And yet when you recognize, he actually, and this goes for men too, he actually doesn't want to look at me when he's talking. I've done podcast interviews on Zoom and had men, one dad in particular, a stay-at-home dad, didn't look at me for the entire interview. He looked out the window, he looked at his desk. And if I hadn't known what I know about boys and men, I would have been feeling really uncomfortable and like, this is really awkward. He hasn't looked at me. But when I know that, then it's like, actually, he's able to find his words more easily because he's looking out the window and he's not feeling forced that he has to look at me. And so when we know those little things, it's like, oh, wow. That just made that interaction go more easily.
So I'm kind of curious to know, when you work with families, how do you support families with boys who, especially if anger is the predominant emotional expression in their family, how do you help them learn how to kind of manage that angry energy and also tap into what is really going on with that child?
Yeah. And it is always about, the anger, that behavior is just the messenger. It's not the thing. And so then it's peeling back the layers of what is really going on as a family system. Maybe they're, stressed because dad lost his job, or they're in chaos because now they're trying to do online school and work from home and all the things. So we always look at the bigger picture and try to sift it down, because it's not actually the child. It's the parents that are the ones that can make the changes that need to happen in the environment. And also a lot of it is the perspective of the parent, the expectation of the parents. And when those begin to shift and change, I had a dad just recently who he was adamant that his boy take a shower every single morning because that is how he was raised. Mm-hmm. Being clean was a family value, and you take a shower every morning. And the son was rebelling. He did not want to take a shower every morning. He liked his showers in the evening. So then it's like, okay, instead of butting heads about this, let's collaborate and let's get curious about, well, when is it okay to take a shower? And is dad, can dad kind of loosen up on how he was raised and that perspective a little bit? And so that change has to come from the parent. And so much of it is about listening, being curious, asking questions, including a boy's perspective, and having him feel like he has a voice in the family. And I hear often that kids don't feel like they have a voice. And especially tweens and teens who are, really taking new interest in the world, and they want to share their opinion and they want to know that their voice is heard. And so I really believe in collaborative parenting. We have to collaborate with our kids. They want to have a say, and it's not that they get their way all the time, but they certainly get to have input into the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the shower example. That conversations around personal hygiene come up all the time in my community, and also around deodorant. I'm like, at a certain point, they may decide they don't want to smell, but that's on them. Like, I'm really hands off with that, but I love this teen rebelling by saying, I'm going to shower at night, not morning. I mean, our teens have to rebel. So that's pretty safe rebellion right there.
Yeah, totally safe when dad can back off. But they were really butting heads, and there was a lot of anger and impatience around that. And of course, that's going to ripple into other things. And and to your point about the hygiene, one of the detriments of this pandemic and online learning is our kids are not getting the peer feedback that they would typically get of, oh, your breath smells, or, oh, you haven't showered in 5 days, and ew. And, coming from parents, that's a little different message than when it comes from your peers and maybe that girl or that guy that you're kind of eyeing.
Right. Yeah. And also, to be fair, many of us listening as parents and caregivers,
come on. Yep.
Our shower habits are slipping a little bit too, because we're in quarantine. Yeah.
Yeah. So. My girls call it marinating. Yeah, I'm just marinating this weekend. And that's totally fine.
I'm going to borrow that. Love that. We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
I'm curious to know, I was thinking about some of the common challenges that I hear about in my community and just kind of in general with their kids and particularly more or possibly more with their sons. So in addition to anger, just, having kind of a short fuse. And then lying comes up a lot too as something that parents really struggle with. A lot of kids with ADHD, lying is a big issue. And so can you say more about that? And then also, how do you support families in dealing with those issues?
So, kids will lie. And it can be a little humorous and because it can be so blatant. And you're like, what? I mean, I'll divulge a story. When I was in third grade, I was learning my times tables, right? And I was not very good at it. And so we had flashcards. And my mom put the flashcards on the wall, like where the ceiling meets the wall. So around my room were flashcards. And every night we'd go through the times tables. Well, I thought I would just, if I just wrote the answers on a piece of paper and held them in my hand, as my mom is sitting right across from me on the bed, she will never know that I am looking down at the answers. Well, because I thought I was so brilliant, right? Wrong. That lasted 30 seconds. But it's like our kids don't have the cognitive ability to parse through that this is going to be really obvious. And so there's that. And part of it, I think, for boys is to be careful not to shame them and that lack of safety. And so depending on, the age and the magnitude of the lie, and of course it's going to start young, but if you can treat it as, oh, whoops, did you mean that? Oh, and kind of be light about it rather than punching down, because lying triggers us. We think, oh my gosh, my kid's, going to be whatever. And I'm a terrible parent because my child is lying. Lying is a normal stage of development. You have to have a certain stage of cognitive awareness to be able to lie. So it's kind of like if you can step back and go, oh, wow, my kid is growing up. He's lying now, and know that this too will pass. And of course, as a family value, we value honesty and truth. And that's just part of the learning. And so being a little less dramatically reactive when they do lie and be a little more light about it is a good approach. And recognizing that boys are really aware and attuned to being shamed. And so again, that's this place of, oh, whoops, did you forget about that other part of this? And rather than, oh my gosh, that's terrible, you're lying. So to lighten up a little bit, recognize it's a developmental stage and move through it.
Yeah. And also, as you're talking about shame, you mentioned it earlier too. We know that shame is different from feeling guilty, right? Because shame is more internalized, that there's something wrong with me. I am a bad. So that is something we want to be really mindful of with our kids. And, I'm thinking also, I wrote down the phrase, I don't know. I will say that was the response to anything that I wasn't supposed to do. And my dad asked me, why did you do that? I would just say, I don't know. I imagine that comes up in your world too. But so if we have kids who that is their default response, or there may be just not, we're talking about the emotional lives of boys and how to help them access their inner empathy and, just kind of really have a full emotional life. How do we support boys who who aren't communicative, who don't naturally go there, who say, I don't know for anything. How do we kind of get them to go a little deeper?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's, I don't know, or I don't care, which, really gets your hackles up, right? And, or just simply no, I don't want to. No, I'm not going to. All those initial reactions. And I always think of those as, that's the first step to yes. No is the first step to yes. And what happens for our boys, because they tend to, again, a tendency, process language a little more slowly than girls. So they've been asked a question, and you can check this out with the adult men in your life. You can ask a question, and boys know that, like, I'm supposed to have an answer right now, but they're still thinking. And so the I got to have a response. So it's, I don't know, I don't care, no, initial response. So when we know that our boys actually need a little processing time, our men prefer to have a little processing time, we can build that in. And of course, there's times when, of course, you need an answer right away. But if it's something that, you can give him a heads up, hey, I want to talk with you about the homework assignments that didn't get turned in or whatever. Let's check in about that after dinner. And so you give him some time to think. Give him a point in time that I'm going to check in with you about it then, and then absolutely do that. But giving them some space. For a teacher in a classroom, it might be, hey, she asks a question, Sam, I want you to think about that. I'm going to come back to you after I talk to Tyler over here. So it takes the pressure off, gives them some time to process and find the words and find the response.
I love that, because I don't remember who I had on the show. I think it was Brendan Mahan. We were talking about this. Yeah. So Brendan Mahan, listeners, is a ADHD coach. I can have the link in the show notes page. And we were talking about, again, with kids with ADHD, the processing may look like not paying attention, not having words, and so we as parents tend to get impatient. Like, what are you doing? I asked you to do this, or why aren't you, and that was such a good reminder, as this is as well, to just give them time. Like, we're so impatient with wanting answers or to move forward on something. So that's a good reminder.
Yeah. Yeah. And along with that, I will say, as parents, we tend to be in the hurry up. And if we can reframe that for ourselves to the benefit of our kids, of, oh, you have all the time you need right now to tie your shoes. You have all the time you need right now to gather your things. And even just saying that out loud, like, hurry up and get your shoes on, versus, you have all the time you need to get your shoes on right now.
Totally different experience. Yeah.
It feels different just saying it. So I encourage your listeners, like, give it a try. Say it out loud. Yeah. It's different. And then it resonates, it lands with your kids differently too.
Okay. So I do want to ask, because we know, especially within the differently wired community, there is a higher prevalence of kids who are trans or who have non-binary gender identity. And I'm just wondering, like, we've been talking about this from a very male-female lens. And I'm wondering if in your work, like, how does this generation of kids who there's a lot more fluidity and gender nonconformity, what does that look like in the work that you do?
Well, I think that you can kind of lift it all out of this conversation of boys over here and girls over here, and just look at it as qualities, as characteristics, as tendencies. You might have a child who is very talkative and very engaged and very verbal. Okay, that's their tendency, that's their quality. Great. You might have a child who's really an observer and withdrawn and, wants to check things out first. Okay, that's great. So that might be the child that you need to wait until quarter till midnight to have the conversation with, or it might be the child that opens up when you're on a walk more readily. So it's like, oh, we just opened the the box of all these different ways to be human in the world that isn't my personal operating system. I mean, I love like eye contact and conversation. So that's me. Oh, now I have this whole other understanding of there's people that don't prefer eye contact, that prefer to answer with one or two words and not have the deeper sensory details, emotionally laden conversations. And so it just becomes of like, oh, here's another way of being in the world, regardless of where they fall in the gender spectrum.
Okay.
And I mean, I just think boy, girl is shorthand. I think of it as, okay. And probably the largest percentage, of course, falls into that category.
Yeah.
But it's qualities, it's characteristics and ways to connect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, all right. And so my last question, if you could beam yourself into the home of every parent raising boys, what advice or wisdom, what would you want them to know? What's your most important thing to be on their mind so they can really support the boy they're raising to grow up into this emotionally intelligent, aware, in tune man?
The word that comes to mind is listen. Listen with an open mind, listen with an open heart, and just listen. Be curious about what he's thinking and feeling.
That's great. And that's where you started the conversation, how you got into this, was you got really curious about these kids in your class. So I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, so tell listeners, you talked about your podcast at the beginning. Maybe just let listeners know where they can engage with you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, come to boysalive.com. I have a really active Facebook group. So just Google Boys Alive and we'd love to have you join the conversation there. At my website, boysalive.com, you can opt in for a free report called Your Boy and His Big Emotions, Common Parenting Mistakes and What to Do Instead. So that'll give you some tips on dealing with those big emotions.
Yes.
And of course, the podcast. Yeah.
Yes. And listeners, I will have links to all of that in the show notes page, so you can go check those out. And again, I'll put a link to the conversation I had with Brendan, as well as the link to the conversation that I had on Boys podcast.
That's right.
You can check that out.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really lovely to connect with you and have this conversation. And I really just appreciate you sharing all this with us today.
You are so welcome. My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable, young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.